Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks and welcome to possibly the most exciting tank review of the year, and that is because we're going to be looking at the brand new Tier 10 auto loading, or shall I say autocannon light tank, the VZ71, also known as the Tesak. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is because this has a brand new mechanic of these autocannons, capable of firing hundreds of shells in a matter of seconds. Today's video should be exciting, not just about whether the Tesak is going to be a competitive tier 10 tank, but also I'm going to give you a massive breakdown on how autocannon mechanics work inside World of Tanks, because I do expect we're probably going to see mediums and heavies in the future with these kind of mechanics. So firstly, to show you exactly what these autocannons perform like, we're going to be running a test. We have two Tesaks side by side. Big thank you to Rex and everyone who you see on the team list in the top right, and also Panzerschreck for helping out with this experiment. What we're going to do is have two Tesaks, one played by me, that is set up with vert stabs and a rotation device, and it's using stabilizer greasing, i.e. we're kind of getting about 40 to 45% reduced dispersion when firing, with Rex on the other hand, who is going to be using a Tesak with no enhancement to the reduced dispersion of that vehicle. Next, what we've got is a whole host of leopards that are set up at different distances. We've got our first two leopards here at 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters, and then eventually when we're all set up, we're going to have two leopards at 450 meters, which will be just outside the maximum spotting distance in World of Tanks, so you can get an idea of how the Tesak guns will fire. So firstly, we're going to do the test at 100 meters, and as you can see, the Tesak, my Tesak was able to do 851 with the first salvo. After that, we've got a bit of a reload time to be able to get another magazine in. You'll see how many shells we have just towards the center of your screen to the lower left of the reticle. And immediately we can notice that I'm getting a little bit of an advantage with the vert stabs here, but not really too much of an advantage at that. Now, the rules of this test were to try and standardize it. All we're able to do is auto-aim at the leopards, and the leopards were auto-aiming at us. And to make sure it was at the correct distance, we're using the indicator that you'll see in the top above the reticle in the center, showing exactly where the leopards are. So they're at the same distance, having their vehicles are lined up directly for us to try and give a fair test for the Tesaks, so that I'll be able to give you a definitive opinion later on about how you should decide to set these vehicles up and whether you need to stack lots of equipment to reduce the bloom after firing. So now we're going to be engaging leopards at 200 meters, and I'll hopefully stay inside first person mode to show you exactly what it looks like there. So the more that you fire, and I'll show you this later on in the gameplay, the more the reticle blooms out. And as we can see here, obviously there's RNG, but the difference in the damage that we're dealing with the Tesak, and the rules were to just full hold the auto and to not kind of let go and tap the guns. And we can see that the difference between using two pieces of equipment and a directive to improve the gun handling of the Tesak versus not using anything to be able to improve the gun handling, and we both have equal crews, no premium consumable for food, for example, or accuracy enhancements as well. And we can see that my Tesak did a little bit more damage with the two mags, but it barely made any difference in how long it took to be able to kill the target. Now we're going to repeat for a leopard at 300 meters. So let's take a look to see whether the enhanced gun handling, I've pretty much got about 40 to 50% improved gun handling, is going to make a difference at that distance. It made absolutely no difference whatsoever. Only one. Literally, actually, the Tesak with no gun handling did one more damage than my Tesak with the gun handling enhancement. Let's go again and see what's going to happen with the second magazine here. Will there be a difference in the disparity? Okay, that time I'm a little bit ahead now, but not really by that much. Now, this is interesting. The magazine potential on this tank is 900. Will I be able to finish off the leopard with the next magazine? And will Rex be able to finish off his leopard without any kind of enhancement? So I just finish off my leopard. Interestingly, Rex doesn't have the gun handling to be finishing off theirs. So that shows you that at 300 meters, which is a fairly normal kind of distance to be engaging inside World of Tanks, that the 40% improved dispersion was actually enough for me to be able to destroy the Leopard in 3 mags, whereas it took Rex 4. So now we're going to engage our final target of Leopards at 450 meters. So this is 5 meters beyond where we could spot them naturally, but luckily we have Panzerschreck who is spotting for us. So let's take a look to see if there's any kind of disparity. Okay, I did 100 more damage with about 40 to 50% improved dispersion there. Now, of course, this is going to get even better with crew skills, but we've balanced all of that out, and we're just doing purely the difference in equipment builds here, with Rex having no improvements, but I having improvements. As we can see, that reticle at the end gets really, really big, but the shots are still going towards the center. And now, at 450 meters, we're seeing that there's quite a big difference in the amount of damage that's being dealt. After a couple of mags, I'm like 300, 400 damage ahead of Rex, showing you that for literally just bursting out the damage as quickly as possible, once you get beyond about 200 meters, sure, improving the dispersion on this tank makes a big difference. And it's going to mean that I'm going to finish off that Leopard even at 450 meters with, I guess that's 4 mags. Whereas Rex is going to not even be able to finish off with 4 mags. And will they need the 5th mag to be able to finish off the Leopard? Let's just speed it up to take a look. They just about managed to destroy it with the 5th mag. So that shows you just how gun handling does affect these autocannons. Vert stabs, rotation device, the experimental turbo, and even stabilizer greasing will really help with your ability to burst at long range. However, something very weird happened here. There was a gentleman, I don't exactly remember their name, who kept telling me to try and shoot at an STRV-103B. And what we discovered is that actually the Tesak can penetrate up to 90 degrees of angled armor if it manages to go through. This creates some really weird engagements where armor-piercing shells are meant to ricochet at 70 degrees of angled armor. But as we can see here, when we're going to be engaging the top of the mouse here, some of these shells are actually going to go through. So what we're seeing here is that the Tesak can go through. That's a 60mm plate on top of the mouse that's incredibly well angled, and while it's not doing a huge amount of damage, it's going through. And what we're seeing here actually is that the T10 with 155mm and like 300mm of penetration is actually ricocheting off the top of the mouse. So this is just absolutely bizarre stuff right there, boys and girls. That from that angle, the T10 was ricocheting. Look at all these 155mm bounces off the top of the mouse. But the Tesak was penetrating. Now, I'm not sure if this is a bug. I've reached out to Wargaming to get them to clarify this, but this makes this preview very hard to make. Are autocannons effectively meant to overmatch everything irrelevant of the caliber of their gun? This is a 57mm we're talking through here, overmatching a 60mm plate. And just to show you that in great detail, here is a mouse, 60mm top plate. Let's compare the mouse to, for example, a 60 TP. As you can see, a 60 TP with its 152mm will ricochet off the top of the mouse until this point, halfway across. And that is simply because all armor-piercing shells in the game will ricochet if the original angle, or the angle of impact, is 70 degrees or more. Heat rounds will go through up to 85 degrees of angled armor, but interestingly enough, with these autocannon mechanics, the Tesak is able to penetrate all the way up until this angle here, and even have a chance, a 6% chance, of going through 78.9 degrees of angled armor. So this means that these autocannons, when they're engaging thin plates that are very well angled, it's kind of even better than heat for firing at them. So this creates some really interesting interactions. Like, for example, a T100 which has 40mm of side armor is now no longer safe from an autocannon tank. So not only can you track, you can also obliterate all of those kind of vehicles that have 45mm, well, 40mm of side armor. But even if they had 45, you'd probably still be able to deal with it. That means that it's a bit of a weird scenario, but for example, if you shoot at roof decks, as I'm going to be able to show you, I'm trying to find the underflaps there of the E50. but actually I can just about catch them there. We can see that it goes orange with the reticle, some of the shells going in, but the E50 is still quite good flaps on that tank. But for example, bellies of the 777 here, absolutely, utterly not safe. 500 damage loaded in. And look at this. We can even penetrate the upper plate of a TVP from this angle here. So kind of like your 50, 60 millimeter plates on upper plates here, they're not completely safe. The armor is still going to mitigate a lot of the damage, but I'm able to still do 200 damage to the top of the TVP. And one of my absolute faves right now, oh, get behind the Object 279E. Let's say you've got him in close quarters combat or whatever, and you can literally just shoot down on the roof deck with this vehicle's good gun depression as well. And that is, again, look, I'm going to pause the video here because I'm not 100% sure this is intended by Wargaming. I don't think it exactly breaks the autocannons. I'm going to go through the rest of this video as if this is a mechanic that is intended, and it is not a mistake, because it definitely changes the way that you could play this vehicle. It definitely changes the kind of ammunition you can take on this tank. And as soon as I have the final word from Wargaming, whether they have intended these 57 millimeters to effectively overmatch and bypass one of the fundamental penetration mechanics of World of Tanks, then I will add a pinned comment in the comments down below. So without further ado, let's get started with the Tesak tank review. So considering this is the first autocannon you can play inside World of Tanks, it's really hard to find tanks to compare this to, but I'm going to compare it to the other auto-loading light tank in the game, the AMX 13105. So immediately we notice that the Tesak trounces the AMX 13105 with regards to damage per minute. 2,887 makes this the new highest damage per minute light tank in the game. However, to be able to achieve this, it obviously has to hit a lot of shots. It has a 75 rounds per magazine, so it will have to hit all 75 of those if it wants to do 900 damage. Then afterwards, it has a 15-second reload, which is much shorter than the AMX 13105, and it only has 192 millimeters of penetration on the standard rounds, and it's premium rounds, and let me clarify, they are not gold rounds. And they are not gold rounds because the shell cost of the premium rounds on this vehicle are 36 per shot. And when we compare that to how much the armor-piercing shells cost, which are 32 per shot, there aren't gold rounds on this vehicle. They are literally premium rounds. They have less alpha damage. They go down to 9 from 12, but they have more penetration, going from 192 to up to 247. One thing I'd like to clarify on these rounds as well is that they don't lose that much penetration of a distance, unlike pretty much all of the other tier 10 light tanks, which lose a huge amount of penetration of a distance, meaning the Tesak, while it's not ideal at long range, as we saw with the target range that we were doing against the Leopards, it's still not losing so much penetration. In fact, it's probably got as much penetration, if not more, than the AMX 13105 will at long range. Another thing I'd like to clarify is that the difference between these AP and APCR rounds have huge implications, considering that these vehicles overmatch everything with their autocannons. And that is because armor-piercing shells normalize 5 degrees of impact, whereas APCR shells only normalize 2 degrees. And what this means in some examples of extreme armor angling, that actually the AP shells can be better than the APCR shells. I know that sounds weird, right? But that's because of the normalization. Let's take, for example, shooting this roof deck of the E100. If we use armor-piercing shells, we can see right in the middle that we've got about a 50% chance to be able to go through. And that's because the original angle is 83 degrees, and it's being normalized down to 78. If we fire APCR, however, we can see it's actually got a 40% chance to be able to go through. And that's because the original angle of 83 is getting normalized down to 81. However, this is only really the case of armor that's about 30 millimeters thick. If we're looking at the top of the E100, for example, with its 65 millimeters of armor, where the original angle is 75.6 here, if we load APCR, we can see that we're actually able to penetrate easier with like an 80% chance to be able to go through, whereas the armor-piercing shells have only got like a 30. So you're going to have, if you want to play these things perfectly, immense knowledge of the plates that you're shooting. Want to shoot very well angled armor that's only 30 or 40 millimeters thick? Load the AP. If you want to try and go through kind of like 50 or 60 millimeters of armor, then you're probably going to have to load the APCR. So just how quickly does the Tesak do damage? Well, we can see that with its armor piercing shells, it deals 900 damage in 3.7 seconds. That is very impressive burst. The AMX 13105, for example, deals 1,170 in 5.45 seconds, so that gives the advantage to the Tesak with regards to burst. However, there's one really important thing to note about these autocannons, and that is that you can't just fire one shot. You can't come out around the corner, fire, and immediately pull back. In that situation, the 13105 and all of the other standard vehicles in the game come around the corner, deal 390, and then fall back. For the Tesak to be able to do 390 damage, it would have to fire 32.5 shells with its standard ammunition, which is 1.625 seconds of continuous fire to deal the same damage that the AMX 13105 can deal instantly. Accordingly, whenever I play the Tesak, I really feel that I just have to sit there and dump my magazine out, and I take shells that I wouldn't in other tanks that I play. Another thing to mention is that these vehicles can't crit your opponents. You can take their tracks off, but internal module wise, I have penetrated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these shells against my opponents, and apart from inside a training room, I've only got like 1 or 2 damaged ammo racks, or 1 fire out of dumping thousands and thousands of shells into vehicles in my testing. Personally, I think that Wargaming have gone too far with preventing them from being able to do crit damage. I think that it should be one of the aspects that makes the Tesak good. When you've got hundreds, if not thousands of shells entering the enemy tanks, I feel like something should be damaged more than it currently is with the system in place. Thankfully, the ammo capacity on the Tesak is an impressive 1,200. This gives it more than enough ammunition of different types to be able to gauge its opponents. And I must mention of different types because I haven't highlighted the high explosive rounds on this tank. They deal double the damage of the standard rounds, up to 24 per shell. However, you only have 50 millimeters of penetration. So this means that if you can manage to penetrate every single one of those HE shells, you can do 1,800 damage in a single magazine. Move over FV215B183. The Tesak is kind of the new biggest hitter, although let's be honest, it has to fire for 3.7 seconds of continuous fire to be able to achieve that. And if, for example, you're able to penetrate HE shells on the 13105 with its 53 millimeters of pen, you can still do 1,440, but that's not nearly how much of an uptick as it is in the Tesak. The problem with these HE shells is that if you're firing at armor, which you have no chance of penetrating, you pretty much do nothing. You're going to be doing like 1 damage a shot, and it doesn't matter if you fire 75 shells. That's still not the kind of damage that you want to be achieving. And trust me, your 1,200 amount of HE shells that you could possibly take in this vehicle aren't going to go a long way when you're only doing 1 or 2 damage per shot. So don't think that these vehicles are tanks where you can just load HE and just randomly hold at the target. So now let's talk about the gun handling of the Tesak. 2 seconds aim time, very nice. 0.4 accuracy, mediocre. But look at these dispersion values. 0.08 when moving, 0.08 when turning the tank, and 0.05 when turning the turret. This means that vert stabs and all of the gun handling enhancements to this tank don't really feel too necessary. However, when we take into account the bloom after firing of 3 and we saw how much that gun spread out, look, vert stabs, rotation device, experimental turbo will still help you be able to dump out your damage effectively, even when you're stationary. And that's not when you're moving. That's not when you're turning the turret to be able to track a target that's moving. And most of your targets will be moving to try and get away from the Tesak. So in a pure sit still, dump your damage environment, as I showed at the start of the video, you don't really need to improve the gun handling if you're shooting at tanks that are nearer than about 300 meters. But as soon as they are, you will do substantially more damage by having a gun handling enhancement on this tank. And that's, again, as if the vehicles aren't moving. As soon as they are, yeah, vert stabs will pay dividends at being able to engage at moving targets. One thing I absolutely love about this vehicle is how freaky this turret is. It goes up and down. It's kind of like this independent thing on top of the tank. And this means that you get a 12 degrees of gun depression over the front and even 10 degrees of gun depression over the back. And you get a whopping 30 degrees of gun elevation, allowing you to pretty much engage anything. This will be really funky for when you're shooting up at vehicles that kind of like are trying to crest ridges above you. Because, of course, you can overmatch, well, you can overmatch their bellies, at least unless Wargaming tell me that that was unintended and they decide to remove it. So all in all, amazing gun handling on the Tesak. Now let's talk about the mobility. 65 forwards, a little slower than the 13105, but 25 backwards, that's really nice and much better than the 13105. The vehicle's power to weight is excellent. Its ground resistance is excellent. This is not a slow, light tank. But again, it's not a fast one. I wouldn't consider the 13105 fast, and considering this is pretty much the same kind of realms, yeah, not great. The turret traverse, however, is excellent at 60 degrees. This means that you're quickly going to be able to re-engage targets that are either trying to flank you, or if you just want to auto-aim and whiz around, you're going to be able to keep your gun locked on the target. So now onto the armor. It's pathetic. There's no other way to say it. The Tesak will get just absolutely obliterated by all shells that a Tesak fires at it. It's only got 25 millimeters of armor, which means that all 76 millimeter shells are going to overmatch it, and its lower plate is 30. So that is going to get overmatched by all 91mm caliber guns. If you get a chance to just fire HE at this thing, do so. You're going to obliterate it and make it look very silly indeed. To add to this, 1,400 hit points. I wish that Wargaming had given it a little bit more, considering how much this tank is meant to be focused on fighting and combat and surprising its opponents. I just feel like it needs a little bit more durability to be able to do that. But more on that in the conclusion. So the final mention must be made to just terrible camo rating of this vehicle. 15.22 is 20% worse than an AMX 13105, and it means this vehicle really struggles with regards to how much of a scout role it can play. And if we go and take a look at all of the moving camo of all of the tier 10 light tanks, we see that the Tesak is only just above the Sheridan. It's below the Rheinmetall, Panzerwagen, and the WZ-1321, which aren't renowned as good scouts. So this means that when you get onto like a Prokhorovka, you get onto a Malinovka, you get onto a Muravanka, you are really going to disappoint your team. And it's very hard to do so much damage, especially on those maps where it's hard to isolate your opponents, to make up the disparity of how the Manticore or the T100 LT or even the 13105 is going to perform on the enemy team. And it's the biggest downside about the Tesak. Equipment-wise on this tank, I would thoroughly recommend you take a full scout build. That would be Commander's Vision System, coated optics, and exhaust on this tank. That will at least allow you to be reasonably competitive on those scouty maps when you're going to have to compete with things like a Manticore or a T100 LT. If you are willing to not use the field mod that improves the vehicle's camo rating, the penultimate field mod here, you might be able to get away with vents instead of the coated optics, but that will make not only your view range, but also your camo rating suffer. For my second build on this tank, I would thoroughly recommend vents, vert stabs, and then an experimental turbo. This is because it's not exactly the fastest of vehicles with regards to its top speed, with everything tricked out, including the new engineer perk, 73.33 kilometers an hour. And as I showed at the start of the video, improving the gun handling will significantly increase your damage at about 300 meters plus. It will also allow you to just keep moving and keep engaging your opponents. And if there's one thing this tank must be, it's dynamic with the way that it plays and it fires. Crew skills wise, the whole new system looks like it's going to be going into the game. And the order that I would pick on this tank is firstly concealment, secondly repairs, thirdly brothers in arms, then I'd get recon on this vehicle, and then I would personally choose emergency so you've got better crew skill after you take damage, and finally coordination to improve the aiming speed of this vehicle after you spot an enemy tank. For your radio operator skills, which are now on your commander so you can only pick 3 of them, I would thoroughly recommend situational awareness, communications expert, and also jamming. Gunner wise, I would start with concealment, then take either brothers in arms, repairs, then I would focus on designated target for spotting, armorer to be able to improve the minimum everything on this tank, well, minimum potential damage and minimum potential penetration. And then I would probably take concentration on this vehicle if you're willing to sit still for those ambush shots, or alternatively you could go for quick aiming or snapshot. For your driver skills, concealment, brothers or repairs, then I'm going to be taking engineering, smooth ride, and off-road driving. Field mods wise on this tank, I'm going to be improving the top speed of this vehicle because it does have a good power to weight ratio. Then I'm going to be improving the accuracy of this vehicle. Following it up, I'm going to be taking the reverse speed. I'm going to take a firepower slot to be able to improve my vert stabs. Then I'm going to be taking the concealment boost to this tank. Now keep in mind, this will make your view range very poor when you're not taking that scouting build until you have situational awareness, recon, brothers in arms, and you're willing to use a premium consumable. And for the final field mod, I would recommend lowering the camo rating of vehicles behind foliage. So without further ado, let's put the Tesak to the test on the battlefield. So first up, we're going to be rolling out on Overlord. And I have to admit, the first time you play this tank, it's a little bit overwhelming. It's going to be a very exciting experience. You know, you're going to want to go in, try and get off that bursty mag, and then you're going to quickly realize that it's quite intuitive, but it's very different, and it does take some getting used to. This is literally the very first game I played with the vehicle, so you're going to see the struggles that I had with the Tesak. So with this vehicle, it's so bizarre because you're not looking for like an ambush situation, right? If you're in a single shot tank, you just want to deal one shot safely and then get out, right? If you're in an autoloader, you're looking for these windows to be able to dump in multiple shells. Maybe you're moving in between the shots. Maybe you're trying to think about the health that your opponents have and whether you're going to be able to destroy them in a single shot. How many shots are you going to need? 1 shot, 2 shots, 3 shots? There is that awkwardness with regards to autoloaders within that regard. However, this tank is more about just absolutely getting the rounds out. And look at that gun handling. And I have to admit, the shot indicator that Wargaming have added for this patch, it's lovely. I do enjoy it. It's currently in the overwhelming fire game mode on the live server now, if any of you have been trying that out, and it does feel decent. So I was like surprised at this moment because I didn't realize about the fact that this vehicle can go up to 90 degrees of angled armor until after all of this gameplay today. So please keep that in mind, that when you see me hitting those shots, I'm thinking, hold on, has the 50B really got kind of like 20 millimeters, less than 20 millimeters of side armor? How is my 57 millimeter managing to go through? But that's the advantage of having set up your reticle to have the penetration indicator. And in retrospect, I was just happy that I got to do some free damage to a 50B there, doing about 700 damage to that tank. However, now thinking about it, I know exactly why I was able to do that damage. I have to admit, this is by far the most frustrating thing about the Tesak. If a tank comes around the corner, fires, and then falls back, you can't deliver that ambush shot. I was able to do less than 300 damage to the FE4005 there. Every single other tier 10 light tank would have done more. However, ladies and gents, I present to you high explosive rounds versus a Leopard. I mean, the 50B got revenge. We just dealt 1,500 damage in less than 4 seconds to a tier 10 medium tank. We doubled the amount of damage that we dealt there in a matter of seconds. This vehicle, when you dump out HE shells into low armored tanks, is just beyond devastating. Your 900 magazine becomes 1,800 and you are looking out at clipping the entirety of tier 9, if not tier 10 tanks in that time. And this wasn't just an isolated example. What you can do with these HE rounds can really change engagements into your favor. So I've managed to get forwards in the Tesak. This 12 degrees of gun depression feels like it's the kind of tank that can go everywhere, do everything. But again, I just feel in this tank that unless those opponents are exposed for long periods of time, the amount of damage that you get in will be less than other tier 10 light tanks. I'd rather play a 13-105 and hit 1 shot, maybe 2 shots, and kind of like whiff these rounds at decent distances. But I have to admit, getting forwards and being this all-round harass potential vehicle does feel lovely. So intuition switch, one of the most important skills you'll have on your loader. And, I don't think that EBR is very healthy anymore. Now, not perfect marksmanship there by me, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that was like 1,100 odd damage, nearly 1,200 damage against an EBR in a matter of seconds. This thing absolutely dumps on low armored tanks. And for example, against this T100 LT here, even with auto aiming, just blowing at the side, 600 damage in that time, it's very substantial indeed. But don't look at this with kind of rose-tinted glasses. Or it's hard to not look at this with rose-tinted glasses is what I'm trying to say. Because remember that an AMX 13-105 would be doing 780 damage in 2.5 seconds. All right, so now I'm rolling out on Stajanki. I'm actually using my camo build with my view range on for this map. However, ignore the rings on the minimap. I think they're being a little bit bugged in the replay, maybe with some of the new crew skills and so on and so forth. So the Tesak, for a map like this, I want to just get myself into an ambush shot off over here. Alternatively, I could contest the northern location where the TVP is, but I feel like that position's really hard to progress, and I just don't think I'm going to really get the ambush shots over there. It's like, what do I do? Do I dump? Do I not dump? Do I dump? Do I not dump? Okay, M48 has exposed themselves, and we're just going to go for them there. 460 damage, but I had to take a shot to deal it. Honestly, I think if I was in a 13-105, I would have just fired once, maybe twice, and fallen back in less time. Remember, this is 3.7 seconds you have to expose yourself to get that mag out, and it's very, very hard to control that instinct of just holding down the mouse button and just trying to rip as many shots out against your opponents as you can. It's very hard to try and to deal with that. And I think that this tank's going to end up being a real big bait where people sit out thinking, well, I should get my rounds out, right? And then catching a shell from the enemy vehicles, which is never good. Okay, we're going to do an intuition switch here because it looks like this Tesak is posturing to come after me. There are quite a few people, unfortunately, on the test server who were focused on trying to hunt me, so I didn't get the best of ideas of how the Tesak played in some of the games. However, I mean, man, that's some damage. I do 1,060 to him. They pretty much do the same to me. They failed to finish me off with those HE shells. And yeah, I think we just saw the HE on HE Tesak a little bit brutal. Luckily, a Tesak on our team manages to finish off the Tesak on the enemy team, and I get a little bit of a respite. And man, looking at all of these kind of like pop-up crew skills now along the bottom, concentration so my tank is more accurate, adrenaline rush is actually really interesting now. Now it provides less of a bonus, 5% compared to 10% rate of fire increase, but it happens at minus 25% health and below, which is very, very strong indeed. So please go forwards, Mr. K91, and that's the new style of the K91. I already announced on Twitter and Facebook and social media that the next top of the tree tanks, I'm just guessing here, usually top of the tree tanks are the same tanks that they have in the battle pass, and it's going to be, oh gosh, the K91, the concept, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, so you're just going to have to go and check out on Twitter what it is, or Instagram or something. All right, so, but those are probably going to be the top of the tree tanks in September, October, and November. All right, HE shells here loaded against the FV4005, and I thought I would actually finish off the FV405 there, and I started to switch my shells towards the Leopard. A little bit greedy, and that means that I leave the FV405 on 3 hit points, so a little bit of a misplay there by me. I was really thinking like, these HE shells will finish this guy off, and boop! It looks like you can only fire like about 2 shells with a single mouse click. You can't just fire a single one. Looks like both of the barrels have to fire in that situation. But man, that did felt really good to just rip that FV4005 apart at decent distance there. So now it's a close game. Well, our team's down by 3,000 hit points, but remember their hit points won't have updated because we weren't rendering them. But the K91 finishing off that tank now and only down by about 1,500 hit points. Maybe that Tesak will be on low HP. In this kind of a situation, I can get close to my opponents, but not too close, because remember these vehicles, they don't have the best of camo rating. And I'm going to switch out to gold here. I think the gold will help me against the thicker armor that the Rinoceronte has, and especially when he's on 137 hit points, it doesn't really matter if I don't do the largest amount. And let's just rip a gold mag, a premium mag. But remember, these shells, they're no more expensive than I fired the regular rounds here. So I do a whopping like 75 damage to him. But remember, and I didn't realize at the time, but I'm looking for where they're going to pen, and I'm like, how do I have orange pen on his upper hull? And it must be because of the fact that these shells go up to 90 degrees of angled armor. Again, not 100% sure this is a bug, but I'm going to be previewing this vehicle as if it isn't, as if it's intended by Wargaming. And what that means is that even if you're just at long range against whatever, pretty much, if you can find those weird thinly armored plates, kind of like 65 and less, if you just dump out mags of gold, they're not gold, they're regular rounds, but you will run out of ammo playing the Tesak like that, then eventually you're going to do minute amounts of damage. But it's a bit of a weird one in a way, because you are using some of that like 14,000 potential damage that this vehicle has. You can carry 1,200 rounds. So if you're thinking you're dumping out 75 just to do like 200 damage, spoilers, 1,200 ammo doesn't go a long way when you're only doing 200 damage per 75 shots that you fire. You're not going to do a lot at all. So be careful with that. So this was just all round a great opportunity to show what the Tesak is good for. Number one, dump out that HE mag to defend yourself. Number two, it's not too bad at decent distances. I say that, but I'm not really doing very much to this Jagdpanzer 100 there. I do 100 damage, and suddenly, as you can see, I only have one full magazine of premium rounds left in the vehicle. What's that going to achieve? Not too much. Minotaur gets finished off. I'm thinking, can I try and get the side of this Jagdpanzer 100? Can we get the Tesak here? Tap, 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 tap. And in that kind of a situation, for a vehicle that you only have a very small amount of their armor for, you can see that we're doing like a tapping technique here. And it works a little bit. You can actually wait, especially when you're not using that gun handling build. When you use this full scout build, like you saw here, you can actually slow your rate of fire by just like tap, 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 tap your mouse to deliver those shells more accurately. Now, you're not going to do very fast damage at all, but when it's down to trying to conserve your ammo, that might be the better way to play. However, when you're using that gun handling build that I showed, you really can just rip and tear until it is done. All right, so now we're rolling out for our final game on Redshire, and I'm going to be using my full gun handling build here. On this map, quite often I'll try and perform a scouting role, but maybe I just forgot to switch. That could be it. I could have been alt-tabbed. But just for clarity, I'm using my full gun handling build here. If you want to see how this vehicle performs when you're using those vert stabs, you're using the experimental turbo, and when you got the vents on as well. So we're forwards, a Tesak here, and oh my lord, I thought I was going home early with two Bat Chats, and here they come. Bat Chats want to have some fun, and what, he does 377 to me. I managed to do 373 to him. Not too bad. And I have to admit, it does feel quite satisfying to be able to get that little bit of burst damage on as people are deciding to harass you. The Bat Chat spoilers has been massively buffed, as you would have seen in my video for the 1.26 preview, and it is absolutely awesome. I think it's going to become one of the meta of meta tanks next patch. Man, look how fast this thing goes backwards. That's really nutty, actually, with the new driver skill, engineer, and also with just the reverse speed from the field mods. Having to give a lot of lead at that 260, and I don't do a lot of damage to him. 193. Maybe I was giving too much lead. There is quite a lot of skill in having to give lead to tanks inside the Tesak and all of the autocannons. So you're going to have an opportunity to try and figure that out and try and work within that shell velocity that these shells have. The shell velocity on this tank, it's not too bad. Well, actually, no, it is bad. 800 meters a second really sucks. 1,000 meters a second on the gold is not much better. And that's definitely one of the downsides to this tank. That because of that shell velocity, that giving lead to moving targets, oof, tough. Only really good at close quarters against tanks that are fairly easy to penetrate, or stationary tanks at mid to long range. All right, so I feel like this tank, it's like a very loud little dog. You know, it's like a chihuahua within that regard. You know, it's all yap, but it just doesn't really ever seem to get the damage done. And that really feels like my conclusion to the Tesak. And that is that its damage capabilities, sure, in the right situation, it kind of does feel like it's the new best light tank with regards to damage dealing. But it just doesn't really have the durability, and it doesn't have the scouting, and it's so inflexible with what you have to do with the gun and the lead that you have to give. And it's horrible with the fact that you just don't have that initial impact damage that you can deal to your opponents. I think, all in all, that oh yeah, by the way, I think I remembered the final top of the tree. No, I didn't. I thought I did, but I didn't. I thought it was the AMX M454. No, it's the Panzer 7. It's the Panzer 7. Blap. That felt fun. Going in, auto-aiming there at the Bat Chat and smashing them. Yes, the final top of the tree tank is the Panzer 7. So all three of those vehicles can be featured in the Battle Pass, the K91, the Concept, and the Panzer 7. I expect that those three tanks will be top of the tree, one by one, in September, October, and November. So if you haven't purchased them, maybe save. It is tough, man. I'm trying my best. I hit 96 damage there. Obviously, once you've played tens, if not 50, if not hundreds, if not like 1,000 games in the Tesak, it will start to get a little bit easier to be able to give those long-range shots. But look, that's 2 Tesaks who probably just dumped an entire mag at me, and they dealt like about 200 damage. It is not the easiest thing to snipe at decent distance with, that is for sure. So, back to kind of like trying to sum up the Tesak and trying to come to my conclusion about the vehicle. This tank, it feels as maybe it's like 5% better at dealing damage than a 13105. But you have to lose kind of like 25% of the scouting prowess. That 390 view range with not the best camo, with feeling like you have to take a bunch of equipment to try and maximize this tank's firepower to actually make it feel like it's worthwhile in that scenario. It just really doesn't feel worth it. However, it's fun. This tank feels fun. I mean, just literally holding down the mouse button and hearing that brrrr, it's fun. There's no doubt about it. So another thing I'd like to highlight about this tank as well is it'll actually be really quite nice for players who just never want to fire gold. And people who never want to fire gold are going to have a dilemma now because they're actually going to have to choose ammo. Previously, it was kind of... There's 2 players who are going to be really bad with this tank. The people who never fire gold and the people who always fire gold. Because people who only load gold in this tank or the premium shells are not going to be having those big, fat, juicy mags off. HE to the back of the Leopard. Oh, baby. Oh, baby. Oh, baby. 1,000 damage. Beautiful. Beautiful. I did more than I would have done if I'd penetrated every single AP shell there. So players who only fire gold are going to be bad, and players who only fire standard are also going to be bad. Because quite often, you want to use those kind of like multiple rounds. And here we go. Let's go have some fun. This is fun. Oh, come on. I mean, that's fun. That's fun. There's no human alive or World of Tanks player alive. Are World of Tanks players humans? I think they are. At least a few of them. Who would not find that an enjoyable kind of mechanic. You know, going in and being able to dump just enough to be able to finish off one low health tank and then switch to another one is definitely one of the strongest aspects of the Tesak. In theory, this vehicle could go in against 5 tanks that have 10 hit points and go ba-ba-ba, 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 ba-ba-ba. We are going to see some crazy highlights from that perspective because you only need to fire just enough. You can stop as soon as you take out the vehicle. In this case, I reload. I thought that I'd need to get a mag in for the 430U. I wish I'd saved a few shots there. But there are going to be some amazing highlights for the Tesak. You got to do what you got to do to try and get the kills at the end of the game and survive on 50. So from that perspective, there will be some absolutely mind-boggling things that we see from the Tesak. For them going around the corner and finishing off up to 15 low health tanks. You could have 15 1 health tanks and it could just go brrr. I am also really looking forward to see what you could do if there were multiple low health tanks that were really close to each other. The idea of just going in and just trashing them in a matter of seconds before maybe they've even managed to get their guns on you, that could be absolutely incredible. So, all in all, the Tesak. Do I think this is the new best light tank? No, not at all. I think that this one's going to get a low, at best middle win ratio inside World of Tanks. I think that while it can be a tenacious vehicle with its current statistics and how Wargaming have balanced it, I think it's going to be a little bit underwhelming. By far the biggest problem that this tank has is it doesn't store up alpha damage to deliver when it's finished reloading. It does nothing with that initial impact and requires you to shoot for multiple seconds before really you're kind of like doing that 900. And 900 is special. Don't get me wrong, but we already have auto-loading light tanks like the 13105 that can deal 1,170, bigger than the AP mag on this vehicle, albeit in 5.5 seconds. And considering how much worse this thing is for those pure scouting situations with like Sheridan levels of camo, it's going to get absolutely obliterated by a T100 LT or a Manticore on maps where it doesn't matter how good your gun is. It doesn't matter how many shells you can fire as quickly as the Tesak can. All that really matters is how long you can stay hidden and provide an opportunity for your allies. And so, all in all, I think Wargaming have done a really good job with the Tesak. I think it's got some really interesting mechanics. I don't think it's broken inside the game, and I think it's going to be a fun vehicle to play. So thumbs up to Wargaming for that. I do think that it's maybe just a little bit undertuned. I would see no problems with it either having a few more hit points, so it had the durability to be able to be that damage dealer or get away with getting spotted. I would have no problem if it had a little bit better camo, but if they give it better camo, then it might just become a 13105. I would also have no problem if it had a little bit better view range, which would allow it to drop the coated optics, take vents, or put a little less pressure on free-to-play players who are not willing to use a premium consumable. And also, I don't know why Wargaming haven't given the Tesak the enhanced auto-aiming. I think if any tank should have the enhanced auto-aiming, it shouldn't really be the wheeled vehicles. It should be this one. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that was my first review of an auto cannon inside World of Tanks. Really hope you enjoyed this video and you liked all of the extensive testing I did earlier on. If you appreciated me going the extra mile, make sure you give the video a thumbs up. But if you hated it, then give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Tesak. Do you think it looks uncompetitive? Do you think it looks too good? Do you think the auto cannon mechanics are ridiculous? And what do you think about the idea that a tank like this might be overmatching every single one of its shells? And if you're watching this video as it goes live on Monday, later on today, I'm going to be streaming on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby with brand new drop tokens starting at 3 o'clock UTC. So come along, get some fat loot, and feel free to ask me any extra questions that weren't answered in this video. So really looking forward to seeing you all live now. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.